The whole of Salt Fork had warned her not to go. The boarding house woman warned her, and the man at the livery warned her, and a stranger on the street took her by the sleeve to warn her that no woman who walked out to the Maddox place at the edge of the breaks ever came back the same if she came back at all. So Ruth Calder stood at the Giant's gate in the red Texas dusk, with her one trunk at her feet, heart beating hard against her ribs, and she knocked. The door opened, and the thing that filled it was the largest man she had ever, and the first thing she noticed about him was not his size. It was that he had been weeping. If your breath just caught, if you have ever suspected that the most feared man in a town is rarely the most dangerous one in it, then stay with me, because nothing in Salt Fork was what it had been made to seem. Subscribe to this channel and ring the bell so the next story finds you, and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Then come back to that wind-blown stretch of Texas in the summer of 1886, because the day a giant cowboy growled 5 words across a crowded saloon became the day that town measured all its other days against. Ruth Calder was 29 years old, and she had lately run clean out of places left to be turned away from. She had been a railroad man's wife until a coupling went wrong in a Kansas yard and made her a widow at 26 with a black dress and no claim to anything, and after that she had cooked for grading crews and section gangs in a tie camp one brutal winter, because a big woman alone with a strong back and a steady hand can always find men who need feeding even when no one will give her anything else. She had come to Salt Fork on the strength of a notice for a boarding house cook, and the woman who ran the place had taken one long look at the size of her standing in the doorway and discovered, all at once, that the position had just that morning been filled. So Ruth had stood in the street with $4 and a trunk, and there had been exactly one wage in the whole county that no one else in it would touch. She had felt the town's eyes the moment she stepped down from the coach, the long, slow measuring look, top to bottom, that she had been weighed by the whole of her life, and she had heard the word float out of a knot of men by the saloon, the lazy word they always reach for. They'd have to lay an extra just to feed that. Ruth had her own way with it by now. She did not hurry, and she did not slow. She walked on through it the way a person walks through a cold rain they have no coat for, head level, getting where they are going, letting it run off, because there is nothing useful to be done with rain. The boarding house woman had been glad enough to talk while she refused her the room. "Hank Maddox," she said, dropping her voice as though the man might hear it 3 miles off across the breaks. They had buried his young wife years back, Lena, the Dyer girl, the prettiest in the county, and there had always been talk of how she went, and none of it kind. A man that size, living alone out there, never coming to town but for powder and salt. There was a dog on that porch had taken a piece out of 2 grown men, and a brother in town, Royce Dyer, who would tell anyone who stood still long enough exactly what he believed Maddox had done. "You don't want to go out there, honey?" the woman said, not unkindly, her eyes moving over Ruth's body with something almost like pity. "A girl your size has got trouble enough finding her place in this world." The Maddox place, when the hired wagon set her at its gate and hurried off before full dark, was a big house gone gray and gone silent, a fine house once, half its windows shuttered now, the yard grown up to the porch rail, and a single lamp burning in one downstairs room. It was a man living in 2 rooms of a house that had been built for a whole family that never came. A dog the size of a yearling calf rose up off the boards and watched her come. And then the door opened on the giant who had been weeping, and Ruth Calder, who had been warned by an entire town, did the one thing the entire town would not have predicted. She picked up her trunk, and she did not run. "They told you not to come." His voice came up out of him like rock moving. He did not bother to wipe his face. He was past 40, scarred white through one eyebrow, big enough to fill a doorframe shoulder to shoulder, and he stood there plainly braced for her to bolt the way the last 3 had bolted. "I'll save you the walk back. There's a kitchen hasn't been cooked in proper since my wife died. $14 a month in your room, and the town will hate you for taking it. That's the whole of the offer. Most don't get past the dog." "The dog hasn't moved," Ruth said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "And I've been hated by better towns than this one for less. $14 and the room suits me, Mr. Maddox." Then, because there was one thing she would not leave unsaid, "I'll want the run of the kitchen, and I don't cook for a man who won't sit down to eat it. I've fed enough crews standing up to last me." Something moved across the giant's ruined face that might, in a smaller man, have been the beginning of surprise. He stepped back and let her by. The dog rose and followed her in, and pressed its great head once against her hip as she passed, the way a dog does when it has made up its mind faster than its master. And Hank Maddox looked at that and said nothing at all. The kitchen told her the rest of it without a word. The big iron range had gone cold so long the very rust had set into the seams. A woman's things sat about it untouched. A blue crockery bowl, a row of jars, a calendar on the wall still turned to a month 4 years gone. It was not a dirty kitchen. It was a held one, kept as a young wife had left it on the morning she took to her bed and did not get up. 4 years of a man too broken to move a single bowl of hers and too faithful to throw one out. Ruth looked a long moment at the calendar, and then she did not take it down, because some things are not a stranger's to move, and she had a sense for which things those were. She tied on her own apron. She put a fire in the cold range, and she began. By the next sundown, the big silent house smelled of a thing it had not smelled of in 4 years. Beef and onions and bread coming brown out of a hot oven, the smell of it going up the dark stairs and into the shuttered rooms and pushing the held breath of the place back, inch by inch. She set the table for two. Hank Maddox came in off his work and stopped in the door at the sight of it, a man not certain he was allowed, and then he sat, because she had said she would not cook for a man who wouldn't, and he was a man who kept to a bargain. He ate the way a starved thing eats once it has decided to trust the hand, slow at first, and then not slow at all. And somewhere in the middle of the second helping, the giant put his fork down and pressed the heel of one enormous hand against his eyes, and Ruth Calder rose without a word, and went and fetched the coffee, and gave him the long moment a man needs to put himself back together, and neither of them ever spoke of it. There was no need. The food had said it. She learned the man by inches, the way a body learns any creature the world has taught to expect a blow. The hands the town swore had done murder turned out to spend an hour each evening splinting the broken wing of a hawk he had carried in from the north pasture, feeding it strips of rabbit off the tip of one enormous finger, with a patience that would have undone anyone who still held the lie about him. He could not read past a child's primer, he told her so, no shame to it, only fact. And so she took to reading aloud after supper, the newspaper, a borrowed novel, the printing off the tins, anything at all, and the giant would sit with his eyes shut, and the great dog's head heavy in his lap, and listen as though the words were a second meal. A man does not counterfeit that. A man that sighs does not come by that kind of stillness anyway but through loss. The town had looked at the outside of him for 4 years, and never once thought to ask what the inside was carrying. In the weeks that followed, she did what competent women do once they have seen what is wanting. She put the big neglected house back on its feet, a room at a time, not Lena's 2 shut rooms, which she left exactly as they stood, but the dead parlor and the cold dining room and the porch grown up to its rail. She did not ask leave to do it. One morning Hank came in from the horses to find the parlor shutters thrown open and 4 years of dust swept out the door and light lying across, boards that had gone pale for want of it. And he stood in the middle of it like a man standing in river water, and then he went and carried in an armload of wood for a fire without a word, which was the nearest thing to thanks the man had in him, and it was plenty. The town made her pay exactly as he had promised. The store would sell her flour but count her change wrong and dare her to argue. Men she passed found loud things to say about what a monster must keep a woman that sighs out at the breaks for, and what she must be to stay. Ruth carried it the way she carried everything, head level, and she let none of it follow her home, because home, and she was startled, scrubbing a pot one night, to find she had begun calling it that. Home had become the one place in the county where no one measured her at all. The dog slept across her door. The giant fixed, without a word and without being asked, every broken thing she set her hand near, the stuck pump, the sprung gate, a shelf raised to her reach in the night. He did not say he was grateful. He showed it the only way a man like that can, which is by mending the world a little closer to the shape of the person he has begun to be unable to do without. There was one night it got past her guard, and only one. She had carried the town's leavings home all that week without a crack showing in her, and that night, with the house asleep around her, and the dog's slow breathing the only sound in it, she sat on the edge of her bed and felt the whole long account come due at once. Every doorway she had ever been turned from, every position that had filled itself the moment she appeared in it, every lazy word floated out of a knot of idle men, and under all of it the new thing The dangerous thing, which was that she had let herself begin to want a life out here, and had no earthly reason to believe the world would let her keep it. She wept into the heel of her hand, hard and brief, the way she had long ago taught herself to do anything that was nobody's business but her own. Then she washed her face in the cold basin and lay back down, because wanting a thing had never once excused a body from the work of earning it, and there was bread to set before light. She did not let it past her guard a second time. She found Lena in the shuttered front room, where she had gone with a rag and a purpose one quiet afternoon. Not a ghost. A bundle of letters in a sewing box in a young woman's looping hand, and a daybook, and Ruth read only enough of it to know she ought not be reading it, and to learn the thing the whole town had gotten exactly backward. Hank sits up with me every night, though I tell him to sleep, one page said, and another, dated near the end in a weaker hand. I have written Royce 3 times to come and make peace before I go, and he will not, and it is breaking what is left of me. Hank says he will keep trying. He is the gentlest man God ever made too big for people to allow it. Ruth closed the daybook and sat a while in the dim with her hand flat on the cover, and she understood the shape of all of it then. The lie the brother told to bury his own shame at never coming, and the town that had swallowed the lie whole because it had always wanted a reason to fear the giant, and the man upstairs who had let them because grief had convinced him he deserved no defense. He told her himself the night it all came to a head. The trouble had been gathering the way a Texas storm gathers, all along one edge of the sky at once. Royce Dyer had taken Ruth's coming as a personal insult, that the monster he had built his whole standing on hating had gone and found himself a woman and a warm house, while Royce had nothing to keep him company but his grievance. He worked it up and down the bar. He let it be known that a man who would do for his own wife would surely do for a hired cook, and that decent folks might consider whether such a place ought to be permitted to go on at the edge of a Christian town at all. Twice that month, riders came out in the dark and ran the Maddox fence, and once a stone came through the one lit window and lay on the kitchen floor, among the glass, and Ruth swept it up and said nothing, because she had learned that a frightened town throws things a good while before it throws fists, and that the throwing is only the town telling on itself. That afternoon Royce had ridden clear out to the property line and sat his horse and called across the fence the things he always called, that Maddox had put Lena in the ground and would do the same to the fat cook before he was through, and Hank had come in gray, and still afterward, and over the cold supper he finally spoke. 40 days she was sick, he said to the table, not to Ruth. 40 days I carried her to the window so she could see the light, and I learned to cook a broth she could keep down, which I did poorly, and at the end I held her. Her brother never came once. He couldn't carry what that meant about himself, so he handed it to me, and the town was glad to help him hold it. He looked up at her, and the fear in his face was not for himself. You should go back east, Ruth. Whatever falls on me is going to fall on you now, too. I've already buried one woman this town decided to blame me for. Ruth Calder did not tell him it would be all right, because she did not deal in comfort she could not guarantee. She reached across the table and laid her hand over his great scarred one, and she left it there, and she said, very quietly, then they'll have to learn to spell my name right while they're cursing it. I'm not going anywhere, Hank Maddox. And that was the whole of what she said, and it held more than a speech would have. It came to its end in Salt Fork on a Saturday, the way these things always come to their end, in front of as many witnesses as a town can hold. Ruth had gone in for the month's flour and salt, and Royce Dyer was at the saloon with 3 men and a belly full of whiskey, and 4 years of a lie that had started to rot in him, and when he saw her crossing toward the store he came down off the boardwalk and into her path. He said the foul things first, loud, for the street. Then, because the street was watching, and a watched coward needs a bigger thing to do, he knocked the parcels from her arms into the dust, and when she bent for them he took her by the wrist and hauled her up and held her there, gripping, grinning around at his audience. No, you'll stand and hear it. He did not finish it. The doors of the saloon had come open, and a shadow the size of a barn door fell across the both of them, and Hank Maddox, who came to town twice a year and had not raised his voice in it, once in 4, said 5 words in a voice that came up out of the ground. No one touches my cook. The whole saloon fell silent. The whole street fell silent. For one held breath the whole town braced to watch the monster do at last the murder it had promised itself he would. A man that size, those scarred hands, a drunk fool's throat right there for the taking. and Hank Maddox did not move on him. He stood with his huge hands open and loose at his sides, doing the one hard thing the town had never in 4 years credited him with the strength, for which was nothing at all. Being feared had always been the easy part. Somewhere in 4 years and one good woman's cooking, he had decided he was finished being the thing they needed him to be. Royce Dyer let go of Ruth's wrist the way a man drops a thing that has gone suddenly hot, and he reached for the old weapon, the only one he had ever had, his voice climbing high and fast, that everyone here knew what this monster was, that he'd killed Lena sure as if he'd used his hands, that no decent soul would. He sat with her 40 days. Ruth's voice was not loud. It did not have to be in that silence. She stooped, calm as Sunday, and picked up her daybook of a thing from the spilled parcels. Lena's daybook that she had carried in to the doctor that very morning to put the matter to rest. And she held it up, and she opened it to the page, and she read Lena Maddox's own dying hand to the whole assembled town. I have written Royce 3 times to come and make peace, and he will not. She let it land. She begged you to come. You wouldn't, and you have spent 4 years calling a better man a murderer so you'd never have to call yourself a coward. The old doctor by the bar took off his hat and, into the quiet, that every word of it was God's truth, that he had attended Lena Maddox to the end, and never seen a man tend a wife more faithful, and that he had held his peace too long for shame. And Salt Fork, all of it, turned and looked at Royce Dyer the way a town looks at a man whose story has just come apart in front of it, and found nothing left to fear in the giant at all, and a great deal to be ashamed of in itself. Royce Dyer left the county inside the month, which is the only kind of justice a town like that hands down, but it was complete. Some of Salt Fork came, in the weeks after, with quiet, awkward apologies and pies they did not know how else to offer. Some only stopped their talk, which in a town like that is the same as kneeling. No one ever again said one word about the size of Ruth Calder, or about the man she had chosen, where either of them could hear it, and after the saloon they mostly did not say it at all. They were married that fall by the same doctor's testimony, and the same town's witness, in the big house with every shutter at last thrown open, and every window full of light, in rooms built for a family that had finally, after a long wait, arrived. The blue crockery bowl is still in the kitchen. Ruth uses it daily, the way Ruth believed all along a loved woman's things are meant to be used and not entombed. The calendar she did take down, in the end, but only because Hank asked her to, and only to hang a new one beside Lena's letters, which they keep. The dog sleeps wherever Ruth happens to be. The giant comes to town now without flinching, because a man stops being a monster the day the people around him are made to see him true. Ruth Maddox had been told her whole life that she was too much for the world to make room for, too big, too plain, too far past what a woman was supposed to be. It had taken her 29 years in a town full of small, frightened people, and one enormous, gentle man to learn the truth of it, which was the plainest thing in the world once a body finally saw it. She had never been too much for anyone worth being loved by. She stopped at the breaks being a thing the world tried to measure. She became, instead, the woman no one in Salt Fork would dare to touch, and the only one in it who had never, for one day, needed the town's permission to be exactly her own enormous, generous, unbreakable self. 26 years on, in the autumn of 1912, the youngest of their 4 children was married under the open windows of that same loud, full house, and the old doctor's grandson did the saying of the words. Hank Maddox, gone gray and slow but no smaller, stood at the back of the room where he could see all of it at once, and Ruth stood beside him with her hand in his, in a house that had once burned a single lamp in 2 rooms and now could not be made dark if you tried.